At 104 years old, Notorious B.I.G's grandmother has outlived almost everyone she loved. She lost her legendary grandson, and in 2025, her only daughter. Today, she spends her final years in a situation that's left many wondering how the matriarch of one of hip-hop's most famous families ended up like this. Let's start at the beginning. The woman who outlived them all. Her name is Gwendolyn Wallace, though the family calls her something warmer. They call her Grandma Gigi, and on July 27, 2026, she turned 104 years old, still living quietly in the countryside of Trelawney Parish, Jamaica, the same green corner of the island where her family has roots that go back generations. To most people, reaching 104 sounds like a miracle, and in many ways, it is. Think about everything a person sees in 100 years. Wars start and end. Whole cities rise up and change. Children are born. They grow. They have children of their own to be there for all of it. Awake and sharp and still walking around your own garden is the kind of long life most of us can only dream about. But here's the part that turns the miracle into something heavier. A long life only feels like a gift when the people you love get to grow old beside you. Gwendolyn did not get that. She did not get to watch her family fill the years around her and pass on peacefully in the right order. Instead, she watched the order break. She buried her grandson, then, almost 30 years later, she buried her daughter, and she is still here, standing at the front of a family line where the two people who should have stood there first are gone. There is a name for this kind of grief. Researchers who study loss call it an out-of-order death or an off-time death. It means a death that arrives in the wrong sequence, where the young are buried by the old instead of the other way around. It is the thing every parent quietly fears the most. The natural way of the world is that the older generation goes first and the younger generation carries them forward. When that flips, something inside a family never fully settles again. And the studies on this kind of loss say something else, something that fits Gwendolyn's life almost too well. When a grandparent outlives a child or a grandchild, the grief is often layered and quiet. It can be invisible to the people around her. Everyone assumes the oldest person in the room is the strongest, so her pain gets overlooked. She can feel deeply alone even in the middle of a loving family, because no one expects the grandmother to be the one still standing at the graveside. That is the weight she carries in that quiet Jamaican house. And for Gwendolyn, it did not flip once, it flipped twice. A mother who has lost her own child once described this pain in a way that stays with you. She was talking about Gwendolyn's daughter, but she could have been talking about any mother in this family.
I love Miss Wallace because Miss Wallace is a mother who's lost her child.
That was Afeni Shakur, the mother of Tupac. 2 women, 2 murdered sons, 2 lifetimes of carrying something no one should have to carry, and she summed up the whole thing in one short, devastating line.
It's an awful club to belong to.
An awful club. Gwendolyn belongs to a version of that club that is even lonelier, because she did not only outlive a child, she outlived a grandchild too. She sits at the top of a family tree and looks down at 2 empty branches that should be full. To understand how she got here, you have to go back to the beginning, back to Jamaica, back before any of the fame or the tragedy. Gwendolyn was a farmer's wife. Her husband worked the land as a farmer and a butcher, and together they raised a large family in Trelawney. By most accounts, she raised 9 children in that countryside, feeding them, teaching them, holding the whole household together with her own 2 hands. There was no fame there, no cameras, no music industry. There was just land, hard work, and a mother keeping a big family fed. One of those 9 children was a girl named Voletta. Voletta grew up in that same small-town Jamaican life, one daughter among many, before she made a decision that would change the entire course of the family. As a young woman, she left the island and immigrated to the United States, chasing a bigger life in a country she barely knew. She settled in Brooklyn, New York. She found work, eventually as a preschool teacher, pouring herself into other people's children while building a life of her own. And in Brooklyn, on May 21, 1972, Voletta gave birth to a son. She named him Christopher Wallace. That baby boy is the reason you're watching this, because Christopher would grow up to become the Notorious B.I.G, one of the most famous and beloved rappers who ever lived. But that is jumping ahead. Before he was Biggie, before he was Big Papa, before the platinum records and the crown, he was just a chubby, bright little kid from Brooklyn who belonged to a Jamaican grandmother back on the island. And Gwendolyn was part of his life from the very start. Voletta made sure of it. Every year she would save up her money so she could take her son back to Jamaica to see his people. She wanted Christopher to know where he came from. She wanted him to know his grandmother, his uncles, the smell of the countryside, the sound of the music on the island. When they visited the family, in the words of those close to them, boiled him rotten. He spent time with relatives like his Uncle Dave, a musician who pulled him into the world of sound system culture and local music spots. He soaked in the reggae, the dancehall, the rhythm of the island, and all of it would later pour back out through his own music. So Gwendolyn was not not some distant relative who only met her famous grandson once or twice. She was there in his earliest memories. She was the countryside he returned to. She was home base, which is exactly why the losses that came later hit the way they did. When you have held a child on your lap in your own kitchen, when you have watched him run through your garden, the news that he has been murdered thousands of miles away does not feel like a headline. It feels like a hole torn straight through your own chest, and that is the story we have to tell now. The story of how a grandmother in Jamaica came to outlive both her grandson and her daughter. The story of the 2 phone calls that no parent and no grandparent should ever have to receive. The first call came in 1997, and it started with a red light in Los Angeles. The grandson she lost first. To feel the full weight of what Gwendolyn lost, you have to understand who Christopher Wallace became and how gentle he was before the world made him a legend. The people who knew him as a boy did not describe a hardened rapper. They described something much softer. His own mother painted the picture better than anyone.
He was very sweet, very cuddly, good student, just a wonderful, loving person.
That is the child Gwendolyn knew too. A sweet, cuddly, loving boy. And even his grandmother, in her rare public words, remembered the same thing. In the 2021 Netflix documentary about his life, Gwendolyn spoke about her grandson and described him simply as loving, kind, genuine. 3 quiet words from a woman who had known him since he was a baby. For that film, director Emmett Malloy traveled to Jamaica to meet Gwendolyn and Biggie's Uncle Dave, hoping to better understand the island roots that shaped Christopher Wallace. But what he found stayed with him long after filming ended. Instead of simply interviewing Biggie's elderly grandmother, he met a woman in her late 90s who still moved confidently around the countryside, sharing stories about her family and the life she had built long before fame reached the Wallaces. Malloy later said the trip became one of the most memorable parts of making the documentary because it reminded him that before there was the Notorious B.I.G, there was simply Christopher, a grandson whose story began in Jamaica. But Brooklyn was hard and the streets around him were harder. Christopher was raised largely by Voletta alone because his father, Selwyn George Latour, left the family when the boy was still a toddler. Money was tight. He was a bright student, strong in English, and he first went to a private Catholic school, Bishop Laughlin Memorial High School, before moving to George Westinghouse, the same school that produced Jay-Z and Busta Rhymes. He earned the nickname Big early because by his early teens, he was already heavyset and nearly 6 feet tall. But the streets pulled harder than the classroom. During the crack epidemic that tore through the 1980s and 1990s, Christopher started selling drugs as young as 12 years old on Fulton Street and the corners nearby. He dropped out of school around 17. He was arrested more than once, including a stretch of roughly 9 months in jail in North Carolina on drug charges. For a long time, his mother did not even know the full extent of what her son was doing out there. She learned much of it later through his music and the headlines. Then everything changed because Christopher could rap. Not just rap, but tell stories with a skill that stopped people cold. A demo tape found its way to a young Sean Combs, better known as Puffy, and that tape changed hip-hop forever. On September 13, 1994, Christopher released his debut album, Ready to Die, and the world met the Notorious B.I.G. songs like Juicy told his real story, the rags to riches climb out of Brooklyn, and he became a superstar almost overnight. His personal life moved just as fast. In August 1994, he married the R&B singer Faith Evans. He already had a daughter, Tiana, with a woman named Jan Jackson. And on October 29, 1996, Faith gave birth to his son, Christopher Jordan Wallace, the boy the family calls CJ Two Little Children, who would grow up mostly without their father. But here is the strange and beautiful thing his mother always insisted on. The famous rapper the world fell in love with, she never actually met that person. She only knew her son.
See, I never knew Biggie. I saw my son in concert once.
She went to one show, just one. He had begged her to come and watch him perform, and she went, and she saw the crowds and the lights and this huge star on the stage. But that man up there was a stranger to her in a way. The person she raised was someone else entirely.
I knew Christopher Wallace. That's the person I know.
Christopher Wallace, not the icon, not the crown, just her boy. And she drew that line as clearly as she possibly could.
That's Christopher Wallace. The entertainer I don't know. Notorious B.I.G, I don't know.
That distinction matters because it is the same boy Gwendolyn knew back in Jamaica. To the world, he was a giant. To his mother and grandmother, he was Christopher, the sweet kid who visited the island every summer, and he loved where he came from. He loved both his homes, the Jamaica of his roots and the Brooklyn of his birth. His mother could not say it enough.
Because he loved his Brooklyn. He really loved Brooklyn. I brought him here when he was 11 days old.
11 days old. That is how early she planted him in that neighborhood. He belonged to those streets, and those streets belonged to him. Then came the night that ended it all. On the night of March 8th into the early hours of March 9th, 1997, Christopher was in Los Angeles for a party after the Soul Train Music Awards. He was riding as a passenger in a vehicle. The car stopped at a red light on Wilshire Boulevard. Another car pulled up alongside, and someone opened fire. 4 bullets struck him. One entered his right hip and tore through his vital organs, including his heart, and that was the wound that took his life. He was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, but there was nothing anyone could do. Christopher Wallace was pronounced dead at 24 years old. He was murdered in a drive-by shooting just 6 months after Tupac Shakur was killed in a chillingly similar way. His funeral was held on March 18, 1997, at the Frank E. Campbell Funeral Chapel in New York. And to this day, all these years later, his murder remains unsolved. No one has ever been arrested. No one has ever answered for it. For Voletta, the grief did not come the way people expected at his funeral. She did not cry. The weight of that day was simply too heavy to break through. The tears did not arrive until later, until she was alone with his final album, listening to his voice fill the room.
I cried so much that day. Just listen to the music. I remember I sat, I stood.
She could barely hold herself up. She leaned into the machine playing his songs and let it all go.
I rested my head on the stereo, and I just cried like a baby.
And in that flood of tears, something shifted. The crying became a kind of healing. She started to hear her son not just as her baby, but as the artist the world already knew.
And that was therapy for me.
Sitting there broken and listening, she finally understood the gift he had carried.
I said, oh my God, that was a talented young man to put those words together.
That was the first loss. The grandson gone at 24, and while Voletta stood in the center of the storm in America, Gwendolyn absorbed the same blow from far away in Jamaica, a grandmother mourning the little boy she once spoiled every summer. But the family's story of grief was far from over, because the woman crying on that stereo would carry this pain for nearly 3 more decades, and then her time would come too. The daughter she buried last, and the life she lives now. After Christopher died, Voletta Wallace did not fall apart in public. She did something much harder. She stood up and became the guardian of everything he left behind. The way she first got the news says everything about how sudden it was. She learned that her only child had been murdered through a phone call from Damian Butler, known as D-Rock, one of Biggie's closest friends. In an instant, a mother thousands of miles from that red light in Los Angeles became a mother with a son to bury. His final album, Life After Death, came out on March 25, 1997, just 16 days after he was killed. It debuted at #1, gave the world hits like Hypnotize and Mo Money Mo Problems, and went on to be certified diamond. More than 10 million copies sold. Her son was gone, but his voice was suddenly everywhere. And for nearly 28 years, Voletta became the keeper of the flame. A news report at the time of her passing described that role perfectly.
Voletta was the proud keeper of her son's legacy for decades.
She managed his estate and watched it grow from a reported $10 million around the time of his death to an estimated $160 million over the years. In 1997, she founded the Christopher Wallace Memorial Foundation, built around a motto that flipped his stage name into something hopeful: books instead of guns. She gave out scholarships and books and computers to kids in his name. She helped make the movie about his life and the Netflix documentary. She stood beside Afeni Shakur, Tupac's mother, so that 2 grieving mothers could turn their shared pain into a message of unity. She watched her son inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2020, and she never stopped fighting for answers about who killed him. But underneath all that strength, the wound never closed. In a 2005 interview tied to her memoir, Voletta described the grief still sitting inside her, calling it like a 100-pound lead weighing down in my chest. A weight she said she was dying to get rid of, but never could because it was her son. What kept her standing was her faith and her family. She held tight to a Christian hope that one day she would see her boy again.
Faith keeps me going.
That belief was not a small thing to her. It was the floor she stood on.
I'm a Christian, and I have a hope that someday I'm gonna see my son.
And she made a choice every single day about how she would remember him. She refused to let the tragedy be the first thing she thought of.
And whenever I think of my son, I don't think of the tragedy.
She held on to the happy pictures instead. One of them was the music video for Hypnotize, where she saw her son smile in a way that broke her heart open in the best way.
Yeah, I was crying the first time I saw that video.
She turned that habit of choosing joy into advice for everyone else who had lost someone. Parents, wives, husbands, anyone carrying the same hole.
And for individuals, for parents who suffered that loss, for wives and husbands who had that loss.
Her message was simple, and it was the same one that could be handed straight to her own mother in Jamaica.
All I can tell them is, don't focus on the tragedy. but focus on the happy moments.
She lived by those words for as long as she could, but seeing her son everywhere, on the TV, on posters, in the culture, never got easier. When one interviewer asked if it ever became normal, she did not hesitate.
It will never be normal. For me, personally,
Instead of letting it break her each time, she trained herself to reach for the good memories.
when I see things like that, I tried very hard to focus on the happy times.
Then, after nearly 3 decades of carrying that weight, Voletta's own chapter came to an end. On February 21, 2025, she died at her home in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, while in hospice care. The news spread quickly.
A tribute shared on her Instagram revealed Voletta died on Friday.
The official cause left no mystery and no violence this time, only nature taking its course.
With the Associated Press confirming she died of natural causes at her Pennsylvania home.
She had lived a full life by then, decades longer than the son she buried.
Voletta was 78 years old.
Her funeral was held on March 12, 2025, at the Frank E. Campbell Funeral Chapel in New York. And here's the detail that stops your heart. That is the very same chapel where her son's funeral had been held 28 years earlier. The same room, the same family, the same grief come back around a full generation later. Faith Evans was there. So were Lil Kim, Mace, and Biggie's children, CJ and Tiana. But somewhere far from that chapel, in the quiet countryside of Jamaica, the oldest member of the family was absorbing the news of yet another death out of order. Gwendolyn had now outlived her grandson and her daughter both. According to Jamaican reporting at the time, she was a 101-year-old mother in Trelawney when Voletta passed, the child she raised in that small town. The daughter who flew off to America and built a whole world was gone before her. So what does life look like for her now at 104? By the accounts of family who visit, it is gentle. Her great-grandson CJ Wallace, Biggie's son, has spoken warmly about her. He says she still grows her own food and vegetables. She still walks around on her own. Her mind stays sharp and clear, and she can recall detailed stories from her own childhood all the way back to her 4th grade years. He credits the island itself, the slow and steady countryside life, for keeping her strong. The family still comes to see her, sometimes gathering around New Year's. Around 2022, CJ even talked about bringing cannabis products to Jamaica to help ease her arthritis, a small act of care for a body that has carried her for more than a century. And when her birthdays come, they do not pass quietly. For her 103rd in July 2025, the family threw a countryside gathering in Jamaica. CJ and Tiana were there. So was Lil Cease, Biggie's longtime friend from Junior MAFIA, who posted about it online and lovingly called her Big Grandma Gigi. When she turned 104 in July 2026, the milestone raced across hip-hop pages, from Daily Loud to Wrap Up to World Star, everyone marveling at the true matriarch who reached such an incredible age. And yet, woven through every one of those happy posts is the same quiet ache. People look at the photos of this strong, smiling 104-year-old queen and they remember who is not standing next to her. Her daughter should be there. Her grandson should be there. The candles get counted. The family gathers close. And still there are 2 empty spaces that no birthday can fill. That is the sadness people feel. Not that her life is bad, but that it is bittersweet in the deepest way. She has lived long enough to see her family's name become legendary around the world. She has also lived long enough to bury the 2 people who made that name what it is. Grandma Gigi remains the living root of the Wallace family, holding on in the same green hills where it all began, while the great-grandchildren carry the story forward. 104 years of memory. And in the middle of it, a boy from Brooklyn and the daughter who raised him, both gone too soon, both loved beyond measure, and both waiting, she believes, on the other side. Click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.